Performance testing for elite female rugby league players. The NRL Women's inaugural grand final was a game changer for women's sport. Historic women's state of origin match with a record breaking success. Rugby League women break through glass ceiling. A new era for women's rugby league begins in 2018. Just a few of the comments used to describe the women's game of rugby league. This year, the first standalone women's state of origin game was played between New South Wales and Queensland. The game was such a success that the NRL, National Rugby League, launched an inaugural women's competition which was played and televised nationwide during the men's final series. 4 teams were chosen to compete in the first competition: the New Zealand Warriors, the Brisbane Broncos, the Sydney Roosters and the St George Dragons. Not only are Australian women demonstrating the ability to perform at the highest level, but with their hashtag, same game our way, they are also winning the hearts and minds of a new fan base across the country. The Elite Women's calendar began in 2018 with the National Rugby League Talent Identification Day, which saw over 150 women from all over the country perform a variety of performance tests, not too dissimilar from the test that I'll be discussing today. These tests were performed in front of various selectors and talent scouts. This was followed by the State of Origin match, which was watched by close to 1 million people. A few months later, it was the start of the Women's Premiership competition, culminating with an international test match against New Zealand, of which Australia won. So as you can see, the women's game is growing from strength to strength. With this said, due to the increase in professionalism, the game has elicited rapid changes in the fitness profile of elite players, and with this growth in professionalism comes the pressure to perform at the highest level, not seen in a women's game before. What I will discuss today is a valid and reliable battery of performance tests specific to the female game that could be implemented into the pre-season period. I will discuss each of the specific variables in turn and then discuss the implementation of the tests. By the end of this presentation, you should have a basic understanding of the physiologic demands of rugby league. Be familiarised with a range of performance tests that assess the various variables and understand the order of implementation or test design. Firstly, we need to identify the physiologic demands of the rugby league player. Due to the intermittent nature of the game, the demands are quite complex. However, researchers have used movement analysis, measures of physiological parameters such as heart rate, blood lactate, blood glucose, and time motion analysis to quantify movement patterns, distance covered, average velocities, and work-rest ratios. Results also show that players need a high level of muscular force to effectively tackle, push, pull, and lift the opposition. The ability is to quickly move around the field in order to position themselves in both defence and attack. You need the ability to reproduce performance in subsequent sprints. In terms of body composition, authors are in agreement that in the majority of cases, excess body fat negatively affects performance. And there is abundance of research that suggests rugby league players need optimal levels of aerobic power, muscular strength, speed, power, and agility. So we've established that the key physiological demands of rugby league are aerobic and anaerobic power, speed, agility, strength, power, and a favourable body composition, i.e. high muscle mass, low body fat percentage. I will talk more about injury prevention towards the end of the presentation. However, I wanted to show it here on this slide as it's a crucial factor that needs consideration. What I'd like to do now is discuss each of these fundamental physiologic demands and how they relate to performance and how we might measure them first. But here's a slide by Gavitt that shows a comparison of physiological and anthropometric characteristics among elite female sport athletes. As you can see from the table, the female rugby league athletes have a higher body fat percentage, slowest 10 metre and 40 metre sprint times, the lowest vertical jump, presumably because of the greater body mass, and also the lowest VO2 score. Now that the game has turned more professional, we are likely to see big improvements on these numbers. However, based on this comparison, female rugby league players need a lot of improvement. Aerobic metabolism plays a crucial role in athletic performance and is basic to all sports. As discussed, rugby league is intermittent in nature and involves interactions between aerobic and anaerobic metabolic systems. Aerobically conditioned athletes have a reduced heart rate and at rest and during submaximal activity, increased maximal cardiac output, an increased stroke volume, What this essentially means is that good levels of aerobic capacity are required to allow the athletes to recover from high intensity bouts of exercise more effectively. A recent study by Meyer et al. Used time node motion analysis and showed that the longest high intensity period without rest was 35 seconds, indicating that while the majority of energy required to perform the high intensity exercise was derived from the ATP-PC system and via anaerobic glycolysis, there was a contribution from the aerobic system for the longer periods. So collectively, these findings suggest that rugby league places a considerable demand on both the aerobic and anaerobic glycolytic systems, and both need to be tested and developed. In field-based sports, the multi-stage fitness test, or MSFT, has been routinely used to measure levels of VO2 peak. While the MSFT may be a useful test in some circumstances, such as obtaining maximal running velocity, it does have limitations in highlighting the player's anaerobic reserve capacity and the inter-effort ability to recover between bouts of activity needed for intermittent sports. The 30-15 intermittent fitness test, however, has been developed as a practical alternative that best matches the demands of rugby league and provides an overall measure of intermittent fitness. The test consists of 30-second shuttle runs separated with 15 seconds walking recovery periods. The test starting speed is around 8 km per hour, and this speed increases by 0.5 km per hour for every 30-second stage thereafter. So the running speed at stage 1 is 8 kilometres, stage 2, 8.5 kilometres, stage 3, 9 kilometres, and so on. Athletes are required to run back and forth between the two lines set 40 metres apart, at a speed governed by an audio beep. As the individual progresses through the levels, the time between the beeps decrease, giving the individual less time to complete each shuttle, thus increasing the speed and intensity of the test. An often overlooked and important requirement in rugby league is the ability to reproduce performance in subsequent sprints. Several physiological factors, including maximal oxygen uptake, uptake of oxygen, concentration of muscle glycogen, and the capacity to buffer hydrogen ions, influence repeated sprintability. The limitations in energy supply due to the accumulation of byproducts from the oxidative metabolism and anaerobic glycolysis emerge as major factors responsible for fatigue and need to be developed. The running-based anaerobic sprint test, or RAST, was developed to measure anaerobic power and capacity and involves 6 sprints over a 35-metre distance, separated with 10-second bouts of recovery. From these 6 sprints, you can calculate the power output. I like to calculate the relative peak power as it allows for a somewhat fairer comparison between players of various weights and sizes. To do this, we just take the peak power divided by the body weight of the athlete. We can also calculate the fatigue index, which is a useful calculation that represents the rate at which the power declines in the participant's performance. The lower the value, the better the participant's ability to maintain performance and vice versa. So basically, the fatigue index is the maximum power minus the minimum power divided by the total time for the 6 sprints. The ability to produce high levels of speed is considered essential for field sport athletes, and it's imperative that rugby league players are able to move around the field quickly in order to position themselves in both defence and attack. With this said, due to the nature of the game, players rarely sprint distances over 40 metres, particularly forwards who rarely run more than 10 metres in a single bout of intense activity. So although high levels of top speed are important, the ability to accelerate rapidly, particularly over the first 10 metres, should become the focus for development. The 40-metre sprint test measures the athlete's ability to accelerate and reach top speed. Ideally, the test should involve the use of a dual beam light gates placed at appropriate intervals, as shown on the slide above. According to Baker and Newton, momentum is the underlying performance characteristic of rugby league and essentially dictates the player's ability to effectively break a tackle. The momentum of the athlete over the last 10 metres of the 40-metre sprint can be calculated as the maximal velocity multiplied by the mass of the player. Therefore, when testing rugby league athletes, the gate should be set at 0, 10, 20, 30 and 40 metres to allow for this measurement. This effectively gives us another variable we can monitor other than the speed and acceleration using the same test. So here's that momentum, maximal velocity times mass. The ability to rapidly change direction is a fundamental skill in rugby league. Ball carriers who possess high levels of evasive skill have been shown more effective at advancing the ball while putting the defender off balance. Although most coaches classify agility as any movement requiring a rapid change of direction, more recently researchers have begun to classify agility as any movement requiring a rapid change of direction in response to a sports stimulus, so adding a perceptual read and react element. This slide shows examples of the traditional agility test performed, so although not a bad test, it may be best to define these as a change of direction test rather than agility tests. The T-test and L-run test shown are the most commonly used in rugby. The reactive agility test, RAT, is performed where the subjects are directed to respond to a change of direction as in a game situation. The athlete begins on cone A and moves as fast as possible where a tester or a visual stimulus directs the athlete to the left or right. Test-retest reliability results report a strong correlation of 0.91 with no significant difference between mean results. Rugby league requires the ability to effectively tackle, push, pull and lift the opposition. In order to perform these fundamental skills, the players must possess high levels of muscular force and express high levels of power, which are required to change direction, speed, and also facilitate leg drive and during tackles and collisions. Power is the product of force multiplied by velocity and is a key determinant in athletic performance with activities that include sprinting, jumping, changing direction and acceleration, such as those experienced in rugby league. The counter-movement jump provides a means to assess the speed, strength, inclusive the stretch shortening cycle, and the validity and reliability of these vertical jump tests as a measure of lower body power are well established. With regards to maximal strength, the most popular and traditional way to measure dynamic strength is to perform the 1 repetition max test. Rugby athletes traditionally perform the bench press, the squat, and the bench row, so push and pull patterns in upper or lower body. However, due to the safety concerns when lifting maximal loads, the training status and experience of the athletes need to be taken into consideration. Regression equations and prediction charts have been developed using sub-maximal strength tests as a safer alternative to the maximal test. However, Dr. Haff and the National Strength Conditioning Association mention that the further away from actually performing 1 repetition, the less accurate predictions become, likely due to an individual's muscle fibre makeup. This slide shows the accuracy of prediction equations for determining 1 repetition max. Maximal strength is estimated by using the repetitions performed to the point of temporary muscle failure, termed repetitions to fatigue, or RTF. Using this method, an athlete selects a load that is believed to be less than their 1 rep max and performs as many consecutive repetitions as possible. The load, or RTF, are then applied to any of the number of available prediction equations to estimate a 1RM value. Research tells us that equations function best when using a load that will produce a range of 2 to 10 repetitions, whereas other equations may be applied by using up to 20. A concern with the currently available equations is their application to women. Recent studies have suggested that women may not produce muscle fatigue at the same rate that men do. If this is the case, women may be able to produce more repetitions at a given percentage of repetition max or produce an equivalent number of repetitions at a higher percentage of 1 rep max. Because few of the currently available prediction equations mention anything including women in a sample, it raises a question of the applicability of these equations to female athletes. With the growing involvement of women in resistance training, it would be advantageous to strength and conditioning specialists to determine the accuracy of RTF prediction equations for assessing prediction. Most of the prediction equations gave no evidence of the population used to develop. Out of all of these equations in this slide, only 3 from Cummings, Mayhew, and Reynolds indicated that women were included in their sample. The ideal body composition varies considerably depending on the athlete's sport. However, in general, most researchers agree that lower levels of body fat percentage are associated with positive performance outcomes. This table shows those selected have higher body mass, but also lower summer skin folds than those not selected in sports requiring high levels of force. There are various technologies and methodologies used to measure and monitor body composition, such as dual X-ray, so DEXA, CT, bioelectrical impedance. However, the practicality and cost-effectiveness of surface anthropometry techniques such as skinfold makes this a popular choice with athletic populations. The skinfold method is based on the principle that a relationship exists between subcutaneous body fat and total body fat. Specific anatomical landmarks are located and measured. Body fat percentage is then calculated using one of the many prediction equations. There are many studies evaluating the validity and reliability of skinfold measures, often with conflicting conclusions. This could be due to the various reference methods used, the study populations, or the prediction equations or statistical methods. The major advantage of the skinfold caliper method is that they are relatively inexpensive, easy to use, and can be carried out in the field. However, many drawback is that the tester needs extensive training and experience to obtain reliable and accurate measurements. One of the biggest concerns with regards to female participation in sport is the increased risk of ACL injury. Research has shown that female athletes are at greater risk of anterior cruciate ligament damage more than males when performing sudden cutting, jumping, landing and deceleration movements, such as those required during a rugby league match. Many causes have been suggested, including anatomical, biomechanical and physiological characteristics, such as ligament laxity and joint looseness, alignment of the lower limb, for example, Q angle, levels of strength and stability, and hormonal influences, as well as technique of movement. Unfortunately, the calculation of knee risk injuries requires complex laboratory-based three-dimensional kinetic measurement techniques. However, the implementation of the tuck jump test has been shown to be a well-suited, field-friendly alternative. The tuck jump test allows the coach to identify any technical flaws that are indicative of increased risk of injury. Through targeted training interventions, the athlete will improve her biomechanics and neuromuscular control, thus lowering the injury risk. Here is a table I took from Hewitt et al. That shows a relationship between mechanism, neuromuscular imbalance, and neuromuscular intervention for ACL injury prevention in female athletes. As you can see, if, for example, there's a low flexion angle in landing, this can indicate quad dominance, and therefore the posterior chain may need to be strengthened. Research by Meyer et al. Tells us that the intra-reliability for the tuck jump test was high, R equals 0.84, indicating the tuck jump assessment is a reliable method in determining changes in technical performance. Sorry, there's that reference there. Here's an example of a tuck jump assessment sheet that we can use to identify flaws in technique. Although laboratory testing may be considered the gold standard in terms of testing accuracy, it is often not the most practical. Performance tests, particularly within a team environment, are most often performed in the field. It is responsibility of the designated head testers to ensure that the facility or physical environment, equipment, test protocols meet the safety and quality assurance. Whilst it's not always possible to control the outdoor environment, conditions should be recorded where appropriate. To ensure performance test results are as valid and reliable as possible, the order in which the tests are delivered must be considered. Ideally, testing should take place over 4 days and organised in a way as outlined by Tang and Wiltshire in 2007. Occasionally, there may be time constraints and testing may have to take place on the same day. In this instance, non-fatiguing tests such as anthropometrics and body composition should be delivered first, followed by the agility test, strength and power test, sprint, muscle endurance test, anaerobic capacity test, and lastly aerobic tests, as shown on this table. The purpose of this study was to design a battery of performance tests for elite level female rugby league players that could be implemented into the pre-season period. Performance tests were chosen based on the specific physiological characteristics of rugby league, however some of the tests were selected or influenced by their practicality. Standard anthropometry, height, body mass, skin fold, maximal aerobic power, muscular strength, muscular power, speed, agility, and anaerobic capacity were the fitness tests selected. The tests chosen were similar as those performed by male players. No tests were omitted due to gender. However, due to the increased risk of ACL injuries with female athletes, the tuck jump test was included as a screen that could help identify any technical flaws indicative of increased injury risk. Further research that explains sex-specific factors associated with injury and the development of preventive measures should be warranted. Thank you for listening.